Try this for a second. Stand up, feet together, and without bending your knees, reach down toward the floor. Notice exactly where you stop. That distance, the gap between your fingertips and the ground, isn't really about flexibility. It's your hips, quietly reporting on decades of decisions you never realized you were making. Nobody wakes up one day with stiff hips. It happens one chair, one car ride, one skipped stretch at a time, so slowly that by the time it's noticeable, it feels like it came out of nowhere. There's a reason this particular joint tends to go first, and a reason it's also one of the easiest to keep working, no gym membership required. Not through a workout plan, not through an hour of sweating on a mat, but through something closer to what a lot of older women in Japan do without ever framing it as exercise. Walking regularly, moving through a full range of motion during ordinary tasks, and treating the body as something meant to be used rather than parked. This isn't a story about a magic walk, or a claim that women in Japan have some biological head start the rest of the world doesn't share. It's a story about what happens to hips, specifically when a body sits far more than it moves, why that matters more than most people realize, and what a short, deliberate routine can do about it, starting today rather than someday. Let's talk about why hips specifically, because it's not random. The hip is one of the largest, most mechanically complex joints in the body, built to move through an enormous range: forward, backward, rotation, abduction. Most modern days barely ask it to do any of that. Sitting in a car, sitting at a desk, sitting on a couch, all of it keeps the hip locked in roughly the same forward folded position for hours at a time. Hip flexors, the muscles at the front of the hip, gradually shorten and tighten in response to that repeated position, and the surrounding tissue loses some of its natural elasticity from simple disuse. This isn't a disease. It's closer to what happens to a hinge that only ever opens part way. It still works, but the full range quietly narrows over time. I've written a guide that compiles the daily habits Japanese women have followed for generations to age more slowly, stay active, and maintain healthy skin and a strong body well into their 80s. It's called Still Young in Japan, and I'd love to help you do the same. Right now, the guide is 98 pages long, but everyone who purchases it this month will receive all new chapters added over the next few weeks completely free of charge. Scan the QR code or click the link below to get your copy and start aging on your own terms today. Consider what a typical day looks like for a woman who wanders through her neighborhood on foot most afternoons, not as a workout, but because that's simply how she gets to the market, the train station, or a friend's house. Her hips are asked dozens of times a day to extend fully behind her with each stride, something a seated lifestyle rarely requires. She never scheduled this as exercise, and she'd likely be surprised to hear it described that way. It's just how her days have always moved. That contrast is really the heart of this video, the difference between a body that gets occasional, intense exercise and one that gets frequent, ordinary movement throughout an entire day. Research on sedentary behavior increasingly suggests that long, uninterrupted periods of sitting carry their own risks, somewhat independent of whether a person also exercises for 30 minutes elsewhere in the day. A single workout doesn't fully undo 8 hours of stillness, in the same way that 8 hours of light, frequent movement can meaningfully offset a day without a formal workout at all. Neither approach is inherently superior, but if your day is currently built entirely around sitting, adding movement throughout it, rather than only at the end of it, tends to matter more than people expect. This distinction matters especially for anyone who already exercises regularly and feels confused about why their hips still feel tight despite a consistent gym routine. A person can complete a solid workout most mornings and still spend the other 15 or 16 waking hours almost entirely seated, at a desk, in a car, on a couch. The workout and the sitting aren't canceling each other out in any simple way. And hip mobility, in particular, seems to respond more to how the joint is used across the whole day than to any single session of exercise, however well executed. This isn't a reason to abandon a workout routine that's already working. It's a reason to add something small alongside it, aimed specifically at the hours a gym session doesn't reach. So what does a woman actually do with this information if her days already involve a desk, a car, and very little walking by design rather than choice? This is where a short, specific routine earns its place, not as a replacement for walking, but as a way to reclaim the range of motion that sitting quietly takes away. Start with a supported hip flexor stretch. Step 1 foot forward into a gentle lunge, keeping the back knee lightly grounded or hovering just above the floor, and shift your weight forward until you feel a stretch along the front of the back hip. Not pain, just tension easing. Hold for 20 to 30 seconds each side. This single movement directly counters the shortening that hours of sitting causes, and it requires no equipment beyond a bit of floor space. Follow that with hip circles, standing with one hand on a wall or chair for balance if needed. lifting one knee and drawing slow, deliberate circles with it, both directions, 10 circles each way per leg. This works the joint through rotation, one of the movements a chair almost never allows. Add a standing hip extension, holding on to something stable, swing one leg gently backward, squeezing the glute at the top of the movement, 10 to 15 repetitions per side. This is the exact motion a full walking stride requires. The one a seated lifestyle removes almost entirely. Finish with a deep squat hold, feet slightly wider than hip width, lowering as far as comfortably possible while keeping your heels on the ground, holding for 20 to 30 seconds, using a countertop for support if balance is a concern. This single position asks the hip to move through nearly its entire range at once, which is precisely what a normal day of chairs and car seats almost never requires of it. Done together, this takes roughly 90 seconds, sometimes closer to 2 minutes, depending on pace. And it isn't meant to replace walking or any exercise you already enjoy. It's meant to interrupt the pattern of stillness that a modern day otherwise defaults to. Ideally done once in the morning, and once again if you've been sitting for several hours since. It's worth being honest about limitations here. If you're managing hip arthritis, a previous injury, or significant pain during any of these movements, this routine should be adjusted or approached with guidance from a physical therapist rather than attempted exactly as described, since individual joint conditions vary considerably and pain during movement is always worth taking seriously rather than pushing through. For most people without an existing condition, mild tightness easing into a stretch is normal, sharp or worsening pain is not, and is a signal to stop and get it checked. There's also a mental piece to this worth naming, honestly, because so much of the discouragement around aging and movement comes from an all-or-nothing framing. Either you commit to a serious fitness routine, or you've basically given up. That framing quietly discourages a lot of people from doing anything at all, since a serious routine can feel unrealistic on a busy day, and doing nothing then feels like the only alternative left. 90 seconds breaks that false choice completely. It's short enough to fit into a day that has no time to spare, and consistent enough, done daily, to genuinely matter over months. It's worth adding a word here about where this fits alongside walking itself, since the two aren't competing ideas. A 90-second routine doesn't replace the benefit of a daily walk, and a daily walk doesn't make this routine unnecessary. Since walking mostly asks the hip to move within a fairly narrow, repetitive range, forward and back, at a similar pace, for a similar distance, day after day. The stretches, circles, and deep squat here ask for range. A normal walk simply doesn't include rotation, deep flexion, full extension, which is exactly why the two work well together rather than as substitutes for one another. Someone who already walks regularly will likely notice this routine still adds something a walk alone doesn't cover, and someone who doesn't have much opportunity to walk at all will find this a reasonable stand-in for at least part of what that daily movement would otherwise provide. Consider trying this for 2 weeks, not as a test of willpower, but simply as a way to notice what changes. Many people find that the floor touch test from the very beginning of this video shifts measurably within that window, not because 2 weeks fixes years of sitting, but because hip mobility responds relatively quickly to consistent, gentle demand, faster than most other changes related to aging tend to. None of this is about presenting Japan as having solved something uniquely, or suggesting every woman there walks constantly by design. Plenty of people worldwide live in car-dependent places with very little daily walking built in Japan and elsewhere, and plenty of others everywhere walk far more than city planning alone might suggest. What's genuinely useful here isn't the country of origin. It's the underlying, unglamorous truth. Hips respond to what you ask of them, and asking a little more, consistently, tends to matter more than asking a lot occasionally. If there's one thing worth carrying away from this, it's that the gap between your fingertips and the floor from the start of this video isn't a fixed number stamped on by age. It's closer to a running total, still being written by what you ask your body to do this week, this month, this year. 90 seconds a day isn't a dramatic solution, and it was never meant to be one. It's simply enough to remind a joint built for a full range of motion that it's still allowed to use it. Healthy aging was never really about a single transformation. It's about small, repeated permissions you keep giving your own body, one ordinary 90 seconds at a time, for as many years as you're willing to keep offering them. Try the floor touch test again in 2 weeks. Not to prove anything to anyone, and not as a competition against your younger self. Just to see, honestly, what 90 ordinary seconds a day, repeated without drama, quietly gave back.